You think you can serve me? Go get someone who actually belongs here, the woman sneered, her diamond-encrusted fingers dismissing the server with a wave that could only be described as theatrical. I don't accept service from people like you. Marcus Thompson stood frozen for a moment, his notepad still open to a fresh page, his pen hovering over the paper. At 28 years old, he had been working at the Belmont, one of Chicago's most prestigious restaurants, for exactly 6 months. 6 months of arriving 2 hours early to prepare, 6 months of staying late to help the kitchen staff, 6 months of trying to prove that he deserved to be there. "Ma'am, I'd be happy to take your order," Marcus replied calmly, maintaining the professional smile he had perfected over years of working in the service industry. "Our chef's special tonight is a pan-seared Chilean sea bass with truffle risotto." The woman, draped in a fur coat despite the warm September evening, looked at him with undisguised contempt. Her name was Victoria Ashford, though Marcus didn't know that yet. What he did know was the look in her eyes, the same look he had seen countless times before in different restaurants, different cities, different moments of his life. "Did you not hear me?" Victoria's voice rose sharply, causing several nearby diners to turn their heads. "I asked for someone who actually belongs in an establishment like this, someone who understands fine dining, someone who looks the part." Marcus felt that familiar sensation in his chest, like a weight pressing down on his lungs. But he had learned long ago to channel that feeling into something else, something that his grandmother had taught him before she passed away. "Dignity, Marcus," she would say. "They can take a lot of things from you, but they can never take your dignity unless you give it to them." "I understand, ma'am," Marcus said quietly. "Let me get my manager for you." What Victoria Ashford didn't know was that Marcus Thompson had graduated top of his class from the Culinary Institute of America. He had trained under 3 Michelin-starred chefs in France, worked in kitchens from Tokyo to Barcelona, and spoke 4 languages fluently. He had chosen to work as a server at the Belmont, not because it was his only option, but because he was learning the business from the ground up before opening his own restaurant. What she also didn't know was that the manager she had just demanded was about to change everything. Marcus walked through the dining room with measured steps, his head held high despite the burning sensation behind his eyes. He passed tables where wealthy patrons discussed business deals over $300 bottles of wine, where couples celebrated anniversaries with champagne and oysters, where the city's elite gathered to see and be seen. The Belmont wasn't just a restaurant, it was an institution. Opened in 1952, it had survived economic recessions, changing food trends, and the evolution of Chicago's dining scene. Its burgundy leather booths had hosted presidents, celebrities, and titans of industry. The crystal chandeliers hanging from the ceiling had witnessed countless moments of triumph and tragedy, love and betrayal. Marcus pushed through the kitchen doors, where the controlled chaos of dinner service was in full swing. Flames leaped from pans, knives chopped with rhythmic precision, and orders were shouted across the line with military efficiency. "Chef, I need to speak with Mr. Chen," Marcus said to the sous chef, a stern-faced woman named Patricia who had worked at the Belmont for 15 years. Patricia looked up from the salmon she was plating, her eyes immediately reading the situation. She had seen that look on Marcus's face before, had witnessed similar scenes play out in her decade and a half in the industry. "Table 12. Marcus nodded. "He's in his office, go ahead." Marcus walked past the prep stations, past the walk-in refrigerators, past the dry storage area, until he reached a small office at the back of the building. The door was open, revealing a modest room lined with filing cabinets, a cluttered desk, and walls covered with photographs spanning 7 decades of the restaurant's history. Behind the desk sat David Chen, 67 years old, owner of the Belmont for the past 23 years. He was reviewing invoices, his reading glasses perched on his nose, his expression focused and serious. "Mr. Chen," Marcus said softly from the doorway, "I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's a situation." David looked up, and immediately his expression changed. He had known Marcus for 6 months, had personally hired him after an interview that lasted 3 hours, had recognized something in the young man that reminded him of himself 4 decades ago. "What happened?" David asked, already standing up. Marcus explained the situation in calm, measured tones. He didn't embellish, didn't add emotional commentary, simply stated the facts. A guest at table 12 had refused his service based on what appeared to be racial prejudice and was demanding a different server. David Chen listened without interrupting. When Marcus finished, there was a long moment of silence. Then David removed his reading glasses, folded them carefully, and placed them on his desk. "Marcus," David said quietly, "do you know why I opened this restaurant?" Marcus shook his head. In 6 months of working there, David had never shared his personal history. "I came to Chicago in 1978 with $200 in my pocket and a dream," David began. "I had left Hong Kong after my father's restaurant was destroyed in a fire. I spoke broken English, had no connections, no credentials that anyone here would recognize. I got a job washing dishes at a restaurant not far from here." David walked to the wall of photographs and pointed to one from 1979. It showed a young Asian man in a white uniform, standing in front of a commercial dishwasher, his smile bright despite the evident exhaustion in his eyes. "That's me," David continued. "For 2 years I washed dishes, then I was promoted to prep cook, then line cook, then sous chef. By 1990 I had saved enough to buy this place when the previous owner retired. Do you know what people said when I bought the Belmont?" Marcus waited silently. "They said a Chinese immigrant had no business running a fine dining establishment. They said I would ruin the restaurant's reputation. They said customers would stop coming because they didn't want to be served by people like me." David turned to face Marcus, and there was steel in his eyes that Marcus had never seen before. "Do you know what I did?" David asked. "What did you do, sir?" "I proved them wrong. Every single day for 23 years, I proved them wrong. And now the Belmont has 2 Michelin stars, has been named one of the top 50 restaurants in America, and has a waiting list that extends 6 months into the future. Not because I compromised who I was, but because I refused to let anyone else define what I was capable of." David walked toward the door, gesturing for Marcus to follow. "Come with me. It's time for table 12 to learn an important lesson." They walked through the kitchen together, David Chen in his simple black suit and Marcus in his server's uniform. Patricia looked up as they passed and gave Marcus a subtle nod of encouragement. The other kitchen staff, who had heard whispers of what was happening, paused in their work to watch. When they entered the dining room, the atmosphere shifted immediately. David Chen was a respected figure in Chicago's culinary world, and his presence on the floor during service was unusual enough to draw attention. Victoria Ashford was examining her manicure when David and Marcus approached table 12. She looked up with an expression of impatient expectation, clearly anticipating that her complaint had resulted in appropriate action. "Good evening, madam," David said with perfect courtesy. "I'm David Chen, the owner of the Belmont. I understand you've expressed some concerns about your service this evening." Victoria's face brightened immediately. "Yes, finally, someone who can actually help me. I simply requested a server who is more appropriate for an establishment of this caliber. Surely you understand that certain standards must be maintained." David smiled, but it was the kind of smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I absolutely agree that standards must be maintained. That's precisely why I'm here." Victoria nodded, satisfied. "Good, so you'll assign me a different server." "No," David said simply. "I'm here to inform you that the Belmont will not be serving you this evening." The silence that followed was absolute. Victoria's face went through a rapid series of expressions: confusion, disbelief, indignation, settling finally on fury. "Excuse me," she sputtered. "Do you have any idea who I am?" "I know exactly who you are, Mrs. Ashford," David replied calmly. "You're the wife of Richard Ashford, the real estate developer. You're on the board of 3 charitable organizations. You attended the mayor's fundraiser last month. You have a reservation at the Belmont once a month, usually on the 3rd Thursday." Victoria seemed momentarily appeased by this recognition. "Then you understand that I'm an important patron of this establishment." "You were a patron," David corrected gently. "But as of this moment, you are no longer welcome at the Belmont." The color drained from Victoria's face. "You can't be serious. Over what? Because I requested a different server." "Because you refused service from one of the finest hospitality professionals I have ever had the privilege of employing," David said, his voice still calm, but carrying an edge that made several nearby diners stop their conversations to listen. "Because you made that request based solely on the color of his skin. Because in doing so, you violated the fundamental principle upon which this restaurant was built, that every person deserves to be treated with dignity and respect. regardless of who they are or where they come from. Marcus stood silently beside David, his expression neutral, but inside something was shifting. For 6 months he had endured small slights and microaggressions, always maintaining his professionalism, always rising above it. Now, watching David Chen defend his dignity so publicly, so unequivocally, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time, truly valued. Victoria's voice rose to a near shriek. "This is absurd. I will have you know that my husband is personal friends with the mayor. One phone call and I can make sure that health inspectors, fire marshals, and every regulatory agency in Chicago makes your life a living hell." David's expression didn't change. "You're certainly welcome to try, Mrs. Ashford, but I should inform you that I've been running this establishment for 23 years. I've survived economic recessions, changing food trends, and countless attempts by various people to intimidate me. Your threats are noted and thoroughly unimpressive." Other diners were now openly watching the confrontation. Some looked uncomfortable, others seemed quietly supportive of David's stance. A few pulled out their phones, sensing that something significant was unfolding. "Furthermore," David continued, "I want you to understand something very clearly. Marcus Thompson, the server you dismissed so casually, graduated top of his class from the Culinary Institute of America. He has trained under Michelin-starred chefs in 3 countries. He speaks 4 languages. He chose to work here because he's learning every aspect of the restaurant business before opening his own establishment. In 6 months, he has never been late, never called in sick, and has received more positive comment cards from guests than any other server on my staff." David paused, letting his words sink in. "So when you look at him and decide he doesn't belong here, you're not seeing him at all. You're seeing your own prejudice reflected back at you." Victoria stood up abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "How dare you lecture me? I don't have to listen to this." "You're absolutely right," David agreed. "You don't have to listen. You're free to leave. In fact, I'm asking you to leave immediately." "I haven't even ordered yet," Victoria protested. "And you won't be ordering. Not tonight, not ever again at the Belmont. Your name is now on a permanent banned list. If you attempt to make a reservation in the future, it will be declined. If you show up without a reservation, you will be turned away at the door." Marcus watched as Victoria Ashford gathered her fur coat and designer handbag, her face red with humiliation and rage. She opened her mouth several times as if to deliver a final cutting remark, but each time, the words seemed to fail her. Finally, she turned to Marcus directly. "You should be grateful to have any job at all," she hissed. "People like you should know your place." It was David who responded, his voice cutting through the dining room like a blade. "Mrs. Ashford, the only person here who needs to learn their place is you, and your place is no longer in my restaurant. Leave, now." Victoria stormed toward the exit, her heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floor. Every eye in the restaurant followed her departure. When the door finally closed behind her, there was a moment of suspended silence. Then something unexpected happened. A man at table 7 began to clap, slowly at first, then with increasing enthusiasm. Within seconds, the entire dining room had erupted in applause. Diners stood up, some calling out words of support, others nodding in approval. Marcus felt his eyes burning with tears he refused to let fall. In 10 years of working in restaurants, through countless moments of discrimination and disrespect, no one had ever defended him like this. No one had ever made him feel like his dignity mattered more than a customer's money. David turned to Marcus and extended his hand. "I apologize that you had to experience that. It should never have happened." Marcus shook his hand firmly. "Thank you, Mr. Chen, for everything you just did." "I didn't do anything extraordinary," David replied. "I simply upheld the values that this restaurant was built on, values that are more important than any single customer, no matter how wealthy or connected they might be." As the applause died down and diners returned to their meals, David and Marcus walked back toward the kitchen. But before they reached the doors, David stopped and turned to Marcus. "I want to offer you something," David said. "I've been thinking about this for a while, but tonight confirmed my decision. I want you to become our assistant general manager. It comes with a significant raise, more responsibility, and direct involvement in how this restaurant operates. You'll still work the floor when needed, but you'll also help shape policy, train new staff, and prepare for eventually running your own place." Marcus was speechless for a moment. "Mr. Chen, I don't know what to say." "Say yes," David replied with a genuine smile. You've earned it, not because of what happened tonight, but because of the character you've shown every single day for 6 months. The way you treat everyone with respect, from the dishwashers to the most demanding guests. The way you handle pressure with grace. The way you never let anyone diminish your dignity. Yes, Marcus said finally. Absolutely yes. They shook hands again, and this time Marcus allowed himself to smile fully, the weight of the evening's events beginning to transform into something else. Not just relief, but hope. The rest of the dinner service passed smoothly. Marcus served his remaining tables with the same professionalism he had always shown, but something had changed. He walked taller, spoke with more confidence, felt the support of not just David but the entire staff who had witnessed what happened. In the kitchen, Patricia had spread the word about Marcus's promotion. When he came through the doors to pick up an order, the entire line staff burst into applause. Even the dishwashers, who rarely interacted with the front-of-house staff, cheered. Speech, someone called out. Marcus laughed, embarrassed but genuinely moved. I don't have a speech prepared. Then make it up, Patricia encouraged. Marcus set down his tray and looked around at the faces of his colleagues. People from a dozen different countries, speaking a dozen different languages, united by their passion for food and hospitality. I just want to say thank you, Marcus began. Thank you for welcoming me, for teaching me, for treating me like family. What happened tonight was difficult, but it reminded me why I love this industry. Not because of the fancy food or the prestigious restaurants, but because of the people. People like all of you who show up every day and pour your hearts into your work. People like Mr. Chen, who built something extraordinary by refusing to compromise his values. This promotion isn't just about me. It's about all of us and what we're building together. More applause, more cheers. Then everyone returned to work, but the energy in the kitchen had shifted. There was a sense of pride, of purpose, of being part of something meaningful. Later that night, after the last guest had left and the dining room was being cleaned, David invited Marcus to his office. They sat across from each other, two men from different generations and backgrounds, united by their love of hospitality and their refusal to accept discrimination. Can I tell you something? David asked. When I bought this restaurant 23 years ago, I made a promise to myself. I promised that the Belmont would be a place where talent mattered more than background, where hard work was rewarded regardless of where you came from or what you looked like. Tonight, I kept that promise. Marcus nodded. You didn't just keep a promise, Mr. Chen, you changed my life. No, David corrected gently. You changed your own life. I just created the space for you to do it. Everything you've achieved, you earned through your own merit. They talked for another hour, discussing Marcus's plans for his future restaurant, David's experiences building the Belmont, and the challenges they had both faced in an industry that wasn't always welcoming to people who didn't fit a certain mold. You know what the best revenge is? David asked as their conversation wound down. What's that? Success, not the kind that's measured in money or status, but the kind that comes from knowing you stayed true to yourself, from building something meaningful that reflects your values, from proving, through your actions, that the people who tried to limit you were wrong. Marcus smiled. That sounds like pretty good revenge to me. 3 months later, Victoria Ashford's attempt to damage the Belmont's reputation had spectacularly backfired. The story of what happened that night had spread through social media, picked up by local news outlets, and eventually featured in a national magazine article about restaurants taking a stand against discrimination. The result was overwhelming support. The Belmont's reservation list extended 9 months into the future. David received letters from people across the country thanking him for his principles. Several prominent food critics wrote glowing reviews that mentioned not just the excellent cuisine, but the establishment's commitment to dignity and respect. Victoria herself faced significant social consequences. Several charitable boards quietly asked for her resignation. Her husband's business suffered as clients chose to work with competitors who had better reputations for ethical behavior. She became, in certain circles, a cautionary tale about the cost of prejudice. Marcus Thompson thrived in his new role as assistant general manager. He implemented new training programs focused on creating an inclusive environment for both staff and guests. He mentored younger employees, sharing the lessons he had learned about maintaining dignity in the face of discrimination. He began planning his own restaurant, with David as both advisor and investor. One evening, exactly 1 year after the incident with Victoria Ashford, Marcus stood in the dining room of the Belmont during a quiet moment before service. He looked around at the burgundy leather booths, the crystal chandeliers, the walls that had witnessed so much history. David approached and stood beside him. "What are you thinking about?" "I'm thinking about how one moment can change everything," Marcus replied. "How one person's courage to do the right thing can transform not just one life, but many lives." "The courage wasn't just mine," David said. "It was yours too. You could have walked away, found another job, avoided the confrontation. Instead, you stood there with dignity, refused to be diminished, and showed everyone in that room what true strength looks like." Marcus smiled. "My grandmother used to say that dignity can't be taken from you, only given away. I decided a long time ago that I would never give mine away, no matter what." "Your grandmother was a wise woman," David observed. They stood together in comfortable silence, two men who had found in each other a kind of kinship that transcended age, culture, and background. A kinship built on shared values and mutual respect. "You know," Marcus said eventually, "when I open my own restaurant, I want to create the same kind of environment you've created here. A place where people are valued for who they are, not judged by superficial characteristics. A place where dignity isn't negotiable." "You will," David assured him, "because you understand something that took me years to learn. True hospitality isn't about serving food. It's about honoring the humanity in every person who walks through your door, whether they're a guest or an employee." As the first reservations of the evening began to arrive, Marcus returned to his duties with renewed purpose. Each guest he greeted, each interaction he facilitated, each moment of service was an opportunity to demonstrate the values that David had defended so powerfully 1 year ago. The story of what happened at the Belmont that September night became something more than just an anecdote about standing up to discrimination. It became a reminder that in a world where prejudice often goes unchallenged, where economic considerations frequently trump ethical ones, there are still people willing to sacrifice profit for principle. David Chen proved that success doesn't require compromising your values. Marcus Thompson proved that dignity is a choice we make every day, regardless of how others try to diminish us. Together, they proved that true justice isn't always loud or dramatic. Sometimes it's as simple as one person saying no to injustice and meaning it. And Victoria Ashford. She learned in the most public and humiliating way possible that in the end, character matters more than status, respect must be earned rather than demanded, and some lessons can only be taught through the consequences of our own actions.